Welcome to our Hangout series, Innovation by Design. This is designed for innovation and design thinking leaders to share what's working for them, as well as the tips to help make others successful. So today, what we're focused on is finding ideas that are meaningful. First, what I'd like to do is do a little bit of housekeeping before I introduce our stellar panelists. So what we'll have is 45 minutes of engaging dialogue, very informative with our panelists, who are from Biogen, GE, and EF, Education First. And then what we'll end up doing is taking your questions. So be sure in the topics and questions area, you'll see a little tab on your screen. Be sure to submit any questions you have, and also vote on any that you would like to make sure are asked. Okay, we'll make sure we get to those with the most votes, and then we'll go through as many others as we can. All right, and then what we'd also like to make sure you know is there's polls, if you could take the polls. The polls help our panelists know how to tailor the answers to their questions so that they can make sure, depending on where you are in the maturity of innovation design, that it's resonating, their answers are resonating with you. All right, and then we're also engaging in Twitter. We're at altitude_inc, and would love to hear from you, would love any comments. Our hashtag is innovation by design, hashtag design thinking. And the question that always comes up, will we get the record? The answer is yes. So by Monday, you will have an email, if you've registered and or attended here, that will give you the link to the record. All right? So with that, what I'd like to do is go ahead and again remind you, you are on the webinar or Hangout that talks about finding the best ideas. Generating ideas can be relatively easy, but finding great ideas isn't as easy, as you likely know, because you're on here. So people have those big wall of Post-it notes, but they're really trying to figure out, well, wait, but how do I pull out the best ideas? So today I'm excited to have excellent panelists, as I mentioned before, from GE, Biogen, and EF Education First, to help us figure out what are the best tips and tricks to finding the best ideas. Okay. So let me go ahead and introduce Anne-Marie Dumais. She's Open Innovation Leader and Global Strategist at GE. She has a long track record of creating and launching many new products and services. Her current role at GE is working on Genius Link team, whereby they're launching a new innovation and product development area. So she's also comes from the Nielsen Company, where she's ran innovation there. And she is certified as a GE Fast Work coach, which she will share more about during the panel today. So thank you, Anne-Marie, for joining us.
Thanks, Gretchen.
And we also have Nate Cameron. He's VP Executive Director at EF Education First. It's the world leader in international education with over 43,000 teachers. And what Nate focuses on is evolving the brand through innovative uses of channel and medium to bring together compelling experiences and stories that connect with the audience. He also launched Collaboratron in 2015, which is an annual staff event focused on radical innovation and business disrupting ideas. So that sounds very impressive. Hey, Nate, thanks for joining us.
Hey, Gretchen, thanks for having me.
And then we have Heather Saforian. She's Director of Strategic Innovation at Biogen, and she's responsible for leading transformational initiatives. Through cutting-edge science and medicine, Biogen discovers, develops, and delivers worldwide innovative therapies for people living with serious neurological, autoimmune, and rare diseases. Biogen is one of the oldest independent biotechnology companies. So Heather, welcome. Very happy to have you here.
Thank you. Great to be here.
And I'm Gretchen Hoffman, Vice President of Marketing at Altitude. Altitude is now part of Accenture, for anyone who hasn't heard the news. And Altitude is a design and innovation consulting firm based in Boston. We have clients like Under Armour, Nike, Thermo Scientific. And my role today is as the moderator, as you listen to these experts share their thoughts on meaningful ideas. How do you find them? So let's go ahead and get started, the real reason why you're here. So first, what I'd like to do, Anne-Marie, since you're a repeat panelist and know the game here, I'd like to ask you to start and share a little bit on really what do you believe are the best ways to define meaningful ideas? What does that really mean?
Thanks, Gretchen. Yeah, and thanks for having me back. I'd like to kick off with, finding meaningful ideas really does start with defining the problem really well. It was actually something we talked a little bit about on the last chat we had. And that's very difficult to sometimes define the problem easily, but really important. I think when crowdsourcing enabled started some 15 years ago, the temptation, and I still see it today, the temptation is to automatically accept and say we want any and all ideas. The problem or the challenge with that is likely if it's your first time at it, you will get a lot of ideas, and unfortunately you can die under the weight of them. Working with our internal and external customers is make sure we really define the problem correctly and really ensure that the specifications and requirements that they're going to have as a must-have, whether that's patents or whether that's, it could be even the temperature, whatever those requirements are, I like to actually, when I'm working with the end state of the solution. So they may not have all the ideas, but I like them to think about the end state so that then we build in those requirements when we're asking folks for those ideas so that we do get the very best ideas submitted versus just getting lots and lots of open-ended ideas, which can take a team, and I've seen this firsthand, it can take teams years. The ideas are out of date. So I think it's really important to take the upfront time to really articulate what is the problem we're trying to solve, and even have the sponsors or the key stakeholders envision what the end state looks like. I say over the rainbow. Again, they may not know what the actual winning ideas will be, but to start articulating what are those requirements so we build that into the process.
No, excellent. Very good points. Nate, how would you define them?
I mean, I completely agree. Building off of what Anne-Marie was just saying, you can have just a bucket full of ideas. You have the Post-it notes up on the wall, and it's really important to get sort of what are you ideating towards, and what is meaningful is really about the relevance of the application. And then I think the opportunity for impact. There's not a one-size-fits-all approach. You really have to understand your audience, your goals. Who are you selling the idea to internally? Like, don't lose sight of the fact that you probably have some internal stakeholders that will have to sign off on things. And then this isn't particularly scientific, but I'm always a fan of the goosebump test, or as I like to call it, sort of the silent nod, where you look around the room and everyone is like, yeah, yes. Like, this is the thing. We've just landed on something special, and everybody kind of feels it. And in the process, and when people look for, like, various steps, and there's always the named processes that companies have, it's important to not lose sight of, you just kind of feel it. And I do think meaningful ideas are something you feel. And if you think, oh, this is kind of boring in what we've done before, and you kind of know it, I think everybody kind of knows, like, this is kind of a, yeah, didn't we do this last year? Then you need to keep looking. You haven't found it yet. So I would go with the silent nod or the goosebump test.
Those are great. Great. Write it, put them in your process, right? Heather, what would you say? Meaningful ideas.
So I think everything that's been said is dead on. One thing that I think is helpful to also consider is, particularly for larger innovation initiatives, getting to that meaningful idea means exploring a wide variety of ideas to start, and a lot of times people don't recognize that. So when I really think about meaningful ideas, I'm actually thinking about kind of what Anne-Marie was mentioning. Upfront being specifically vague, right, about the opportunity, about the solution that you're trying to develop for that opportunity, and that means having kind of a multi-pronged approach from the very beginning, versus getting in a room and identify, okay, this is the one path we should take. So it's almost having the restraint with yourself and your teams before committing to a specific path, but rather exploring a variety of paths forward.
Yeah, excellent points. And Nate, would love to just go back to you. And how do you get ideas to vet at your company?
So I think the biggest thing, Heather was just sort of touching on this, is you have to create a safe space. And really, when you get in the room for that first time, and usually you're looking at, depending on the scope and scale of what you're trying to solve for, to think that you're just going to have one time is usually kind of foolish. I would plan on several sort of brainstorms or whatever you call them, but start broad, start wide, create a safe space, and we like to do sort of what we call mosh pits. It's a little bit like a charrette for those that are familiar with that term. It's several days locked in a room. We do actually provide food and water, just for anybody wondering. Focused on a single challenge that we're trying to solve. And then we have daily crits that really challenge the work. We remove sort of the personal aspect of it and really focus on, it's about, the comments and feedback are all about the work. We also do things like jam sessions, which are like brainstorms. They're the 1 or 2 or 3 hour sort of sessions. And again, to Heather's point of go broad and create that safe space. And I have a bit of a saying that I'll use with the team here. Let's get weird with it. Which just I want everybody to know that, like, let's go to some weird places, and that's okay. It's a completely safe space.
Yeah, it's interesting you say in terms of broad. You're trying to get a lot of different ideas, just like the whole saying of don't break down silos, let ideas come from all different companies. I know with our process at Altitude, we still look at, with our decision-making framework, to help our clients and customers to get what they really want and love, right? Is we look at 3 areas and we say, look, it needs to be desirable, feasible, and viable. And that's really what we try to use throughout our framework to figure out if those are the best ideas. So I just thought I'd add that because I think everybody looks for what's the checklist also on how you vet them, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Anne-Marie, what's your thinking here?
Yeah, a fun technique we sometimes use in live sessions, which is, it's the reverse of that. It's once you do have a challenge in front of you, actually, what would you do to break it? What would you do to try to prevent solving the problem? And that I've had some really interesting, and you want to touch on as well, which is the kinds of folks you should involve in ideation. One, it should be a broad set of people, not just the people you assume are the SMEs. And that technique completely disarms people and actually makes it really fun to think about not how you solve the problem, but how would you actually get in the way of the problem and break it, and barriers to stopping us, and then ideate around those. So that's another fun kind of exercise as well when we have a live session. You had mentioned, and Nate had mentioned, getting in the room and making sure that that it is a safe environment. I think that's a really important cultural phenomenon, not just to be witnessed in person. I think that's an important phenomenon to be witnessed virtually. It's not an easy thing to do. It is something. You had mentioned Fastworks, so it made me think of it. I wanted to mention that, and that Fastworks is about driving a culture, is not afraid to take risks, and is not afraid to pivot, not afraid to admit, you know what, that path we're going down is wrong. Pivot, move quickly. Let's not have our ego get in the way and say, that's the best idea, and we're going to go to it. I think that's a really important piece of driving really great innovation, and one point I wanted to make sure and bring up that Nate had brought up.
Yeah, it's interesting you're saying about, you want to encourage people to keep contributing, right? Don't shut them down, do smooth pivots, things like that. So when you're trying to get more ideas, Anne-Marie, especially good ones, right? Obviously, we're talking about how you best ones, right? How do you encourage those contributions? You've done the November hangout, right, of how you sell ideas and design thinking internally. I think it relates to that, right? Is, how are you encouraging people? Do you use tools? Any specific techniques you have?
Yes, there are lots of tricks and tricks that you can use. Depending, if you're doing a virtual collaboration, which is, we're 300,000 plus employees, so we tend to do a lot of that. And then, the world a lot. So we use a lot of the technology to drive that engagement. And then within the technology, not necessarily tracking and pointing out individual users, but tracking regions, tracking groups, and which groups are performing and doing what, and how come Asia Pacific is ahead of Europe. And you can use ways, who's contributing more, people how come our team isn't contributing as much? So those kinds of things definitely help. I think making sure your technology is easily and readily accessible, whether that's a mobile device or a desktop device, I think that's really important. Other ways to get them involved is also allowing team contributions too. I think some idea independently, so allowing for that is also pretty important as well. It's just some of the ways. And we've also dabbled in gamification too, which is less about ideation and more about when you get to that stage where you're at your final 5 or 8 top 10 way in which when you ask folks for feedback or commentary that you're not, what happens a lot of times is people will vote for the people they know. And that's really not what we're looking for. What we're looking for is people to really view the ideas as standalone and viability when we're looking for that kind of feedback. And so a way to play around with that is points, if you will. And they can spread all those points like in the stock market on the one idea they think is going to win, or the one they think has the most viability, or they can spread those points across a variety of the top 5 or so submissions. And depending on the way they vote, they have some skin in the game, which makes it a lot more compelling. I will say, before anyone debates a strong denominator, if you will, of participants before you take that on. But I've seen it not work some cases, hence why I mentioned that caveat, but I've also seen it work in some cases too, where people, what they're doing is they're starting to take it serious, and it's starting to be treated more like a stock market type of valuation versus I'm going to vote for Gretchen or I like them,
Yeah, excellent points. Heather, when you're trying to get new ideas or better ideas or great ideas, how are you encouraging contributions?
Sure. So I think particularly in the case of a lot of the work we do here is to develop technologies that are going to take at least 3, 5, potentially 10 years to bring to commercialization. A lot of what we do is identify a core team, establish a network of individuals that core team can go back to, do a lot of homework, either collectively or via the network in terms of, okay, we have this business need, but what does that really mean? So model it out from an economics perspective, if it's biology related, to do some biology modeling, really try and understand from all aspects what is the problem and the issue, to understand what levers could then be addressed. And truthfully, a lot of what we do takes place over time. We'll spend roughly a year or so if it's a big innovation initiative up front in an exploratory period where we just have the freedom to explore. And that's going to include technology scouting. It could include, recently we leveraged a really bright team of students at MIT to help us better understand certain technologies and certain activities, attending conferences over that year, and just kind of sitting with the issue and understanding it from a variety of perspectives right across the company, not just the technology piece, and then coming back and saying, okay, so we did all this work, we went out there, we saw things, and here's our big idea, right? And that can literally take a year to formulate. And it's not an all of a sudden moment. In fact, potentially maybe it's a little bit anticlimactic in a sense, because some of the most amazing ideas, if we look back over the span of 12 months, they really happened in small bits and pieces of analysis and sort of like, well, all right, so this is an additional characteristic. So from that perspective, it's really, creating that structure, creating that team, that network, and then enabling that core team to be able to process as much information as possible. And because they're sort of isolated and defined as a team, they have the freedom to explore, and they understand that any of their ideas are going to be considered within the team itself. So, we'll do things over a period of 12 months, for example, with a specific initiative. We'll do co-working where some period of time every week, some afternoon we'll all come, we'll do work on other stuff, but then we're just physically in the same space because we're not typically working together, right? But just to make sure that sort of random kind of conversations can happen and we can get to know one another.
Okay, excellent points. And if you're just joining in, I've seen additional folks joining. I just want to make sure you know our panelists today are Nate Cameron, who's from EF, Education First. They focus on innovating in education through student travel programs, language learning, and academic degrees. And we have Heather Saforian here from Biogen. Biogen is one of the world's oldest independent biotechnology companies. And we have Anne-Marie Dumais here from GE. Okay, so again, thank you to our panelists. And we're talking about how you capture great, meaningful ideas. So Nate, I know you've heard Anne-Marie and Heather comment a little bit about, really how do you encourage contributions to get the great ideas. Do you have anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a couple practical applications that, like, if you're going into a brainstorm this afternoon or tomorrow, a couple things to try, and Anne-Marie touched on this a little bit, is what would we definitely not do? That is such a fun thing to employ in a brainstorm. List out the things that would maybe get you fired, or maybe a little bit off. Just make sure, like, pro tip on this one, just make sure to clearly mark it as the list of things to not do, just in case you take the lunch break and then, like, your boss walks in and they're like, what is everybody doing in here? But I think that what we definitely not do, it's a lot of fun and it shakes up the room. As I mentioned before, I think the get weird with it is kind of fun and challenges people to try some really out there ideas. And finally, one of the things that when we get in the room to brainstorm, we do this almost every time, is let's get our safety net idea. And so the safety net idea is that sort of baseline idea. You know the room, you know the talent you have. They're going to come up with those good, solid sort of, B+, A- ideas that you can rely on. It's not going to revolutionize, but it will catch you guys fall. And so the safety net idea is a huge thing we use here at EF.
That's a great one.
I'd love to ask a question to the panelists too, and because we do this to varying extents, do you actually get who submit the ideas to actually participate in the execution all the time, some of the time? I'm just curious.
For us, we usually build project teams that are going to see the whole project through. We run in sort of small cross-functional teams mostly here. We will, depending on the scale, scope, we run these very large student leadership summits. We have one coming up in Italy with Anthony Bourdain as the keynote. So for those massive events, we usually will bring a few folks in that are not going to be part of the project team, but I would say 8 out of 10 times it is that core team all the way through.
In our case, it's not a straightforward question at times. Because you can have a core idea, right, and the core team may have started on that, and then you go and you meet with somebody for coffee, and they mention something, and you never talk to them again. But it turns out that this one thing they said in 10 minutes completely changed the perspective of the team. I would say in those circumstances, we certainly try to add them to our network and make sure that somebody on our team is on a recurring basis engaging them, because in particular, when you get an individual that is just thinking in a very different way than you are, but yet these ideas have relevance and they can interconnect, then we try as much as possible to kind of stretch our culture and engage them. And, a lot of times it's a coffee here or there, but it makes a huge impact. I think the bottom line that I really emphasize with our teams, I have really talented scientists that work with us, is just, there are great ideas everywhere. Make sure we're finding them. It's easy to pay $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 to do technology scouting for a certain area of patents, right? It's easy to go talk to a professor that's already written a paper and done this work versus recreate, all by ourselves a set of experiments. I think that's one of the most important pieces, is that I'd rather never be in a situation where there was knowledge out there and we just simply didn't go looking for it.
Yeah.
I love that. I think to your point, Heather, and this ties back to something you were saying earlier about getting in the room and going broad, is I think it's super important to keep yourself open throughout the entire process. You'll have those moments. It might I'll drive my team nuts a little bit here and there. We'll have that moment where that coffee conversation, something will come up sort of deep into the process where it's like a, oh my God moment. And don't be closed off to those. I think that's hugely important.
I think one of the challenges we have is I'm reading the title again. Finding ideas that are meaningful is also finding and creating the network of people who can provide those ideas. And to both Nate and Heather's points, some of the best ideas do not come from the people you would expect. So mapping out the the ledge, I think is one of the more interesting opportunities we have as a society or as an industry, because just to look at somebody's LinkedIn profile and know that they're a material scientist or what have you, that's not enough of that, because some of the ideas can come from a non-physicist or something. So I think there's a huge opportunity there for someone to grab to help us find who are those nodes, those networks out in the wide universe that aren't necessarily just your standard, metadata file. Oh, those ones check the box to get the ideas from. I think that's one of the more challenging. I think we all say, yeah, you should tap those people who are least expected to give you good ideas. Well, having some sort of AI in that area to help would actually be really beneficial. So.
Yeah, we definitely see AI coming on more and more strong. Hey, Heather, can you talk a little bit about how do you walk through so many ideas to discover which ones are meaningful? Do you have a process, anything? And what are some of the misconceptions of the process?
Sure. I mean, so if we talk specifically about kind of like an ideation session structure or establishing a strategy and kind of the approach we're going to take to develop a set of new technologies, it's pretty straightforward, and to some people it's a little bit arduous, but really it starts with, we talked a lot about the opportunity, so getting that on paper and really clearly being able to articulate what the challenge is and also what the value, so and being able from a senior leadership perspective to put on all the hats from a finance perspective, from in our case a manufacturing perspective, you've got a technology perspective, you have an R&D development, from a drug perspective, right? So you got to put on all those hats and put together a business case for your team. And basically I prep like a big briefing deck that they've either helped develop or other people have. And then for a session, generally speaking, it's laid out in what are the key questions that we want to answer. And I expect participants to come to that session with the answers to their questions on sticky paper, because as we've kind of been chatting about, I say this all the time with my teams, I mean, there's clear evidence, right? People are cognitively lazy, If you ask them to come into a room and give you 5 ideas, they're going to give you 5 ideas. Are they the good ideas? Probably not. But if you force them to spend, a whole bunch of time up front and they have to bring 16 stickies, right? It's a very painful process, but 1, they've worked through all their easy ideas right away, and 2, they've done it outside the room. So a lot of getting to like some really great ideas in terms of an ideation session is pulling all those stickies together from all the different participants, arranging them, sorting them, breaking down into groups, and somebody will own one wall, one set of questions, 3 people will sort through all the stickies, another wall, other people will sort through the stickies, and then all of a sudden you start to see this really big technical challenge broken smartly, your team has smartly broken it down into certain components, and then all these random stickies are starting to coalesce around certain areas or approaches to solve the problem, and even though they may be discrete, you can always back out of them a little bit. And then you leave that room with an action plan of, okay, over the next 6 months, we're going to explore solving this core part of the challenge by, evaluating these types of approaches. And then it's just, it's really keeping people honest and doing a lot of planning. I mean, in our case, once you have an ideation session, a lot of the stuff we work on, like I said, is many years. We have a 3 to 5 year plan, and keeping people constantly engaged and working hard at what they're doing, and not picking something up and putting it down and coming back to it 6 months later. That's not going to help create the synergy in their brains of what makes sense and what new ideas can be put together.
It's interesting because I think what's also really important, I know like at Altitude for our clients, we'll use an iterative process, right? So rather than as you're developing things, instead of going out and getting yes, no type of feedback, right? We'll go and try to check in more and really ask the why, right? So, why are they giving the feedback, and really probing more on it. And that really leads to getting better information, right, for better improvements. And even like developing maybe a prototype, right, that people can comment on, because it's like a stimuli, right? We found that really helps us be able to get to even more meaningful ideas and a better solution. So,
yeah, and whether it's, I came from the product world and now I innovate a lot more around technological processes, but whether it's a product or a process, you can always prototype or model it out. And that is something I emphasize with my teams, is put something on paper, and whether it's a new manufacturing process and you can actually start to understand what the process economics in the future would be and how relevant that would be, or like you said, you're developing a new product. In my prior life, that's what I was doing. We would be constantly going back to end users with very low fidelity prototypes, right? That would give us a very directional sense, come back, bring the scientists or whoever else was relevant in the development process, and then come back and say, all right, so what did we learn? And not let people get too far down a certain pathway until we were very confident that was the right way to go.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to pivot a little bit, because we've talked a lot about going and making sure that we're open in terms of gathering ideas. So Nate, would love to hear your thoughts a little bit on personality types and who do you definitely want on the team, and really when you're having people evaluate.
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, I kind of want a bit of an entrepreneur who has commands, but no ego. So good luck to me to find that, right? And I want folks with a great sense of taste, an incredibly high bar for great work, and they know what great means. And again, to the a lot of my career has been in different agency world and in-house at some other places too, and you get some strong egos there, and I've hit a point in my career where I wanted, as I'm building out the team at EF, I just didn't want to deal with that. I want to make great work and I want to have fun doing it. So that, above all else, the no jerks rule I think applies here. But as far as great and getting people who know what great is, I think great is like, back to kind of the Goosebumps thing from earlier, great is like that new song you hear that sounds familiar, but you can't place it because there's something new, special, different about it. It makes you a bit uncomfortable, but in a good way. And knowing that you have those people around you that they have a sense of taste in what works and what doesn't work. And ideally those people are in leadership roles so that when it comes to, the sort of hippie love fest that really can be ideation sessions where everybody's trying to not hurt feelings and sort of the, yes and all of that you do need that person that can say in a very positive way that here's the path and here's where we're going to start to edit and here's where we're going to start to go. And that's where I think a little bit of that command but no jerk thing comes in for me.
So no jerks, get goosebumps. We got it.
Goosebumps all the way around. Yeah.
Heather, I'm going to move a little bit in terms of talking further on the process. Can you walk us through how you use your process or any other means to identify the ideas that are the best ones?
Well, I think one piece we haven't hit upon, well, we've kind of touched upon, but maybe not as much as, at least it's important to me, is how you work with leadership in terms of really trying to work on breakthrough technologies. So, you've got your core team, but how you engage leadership, I think, is also really critical. And there's a few key pieces there. Is, one, don't not engage them. And if somebody's not on board, don't avoid them, right? That's not going to work in the long run. Another misconception that I think sometimes our team, we'll have a meeting and we'll have presented this really amazing thing. People are like, how did the leadership team not get to our conclusion? You have to remember that these people are, first of all, I'm very fortunate to work with very, very bright individuals at every level, right? But particularly in terms of senior leadership, these are individuals that are incredibly bright. They have a ton of depth experience, but they're super busy. And so the best way to actually get their guidance, right, and help them drive your initiative forward is to make sure that on a recurring basis you're pinging them, and really, really being thoughtful about which members of the leadership team are kind of going to take the lead, because only certain people, only so much bandwidth, right? So if you pick a few people, then they put their hand up and say, all right, we'll be available to help you make sort of more agile, more flexible decisions on the go. And I think that that's really, really critical, and it's something that we are very, we plan is the bottom line. We plan how we're going to engage our leadership team, what major decision points or questions we're going to work them through. So if we know that we need to get to a big conclusion in 6 months, we're probably going to have 2 or 3 steering committee meetings to process aspects of that big decision, so that when they finally get to the big decision, they're like, yep, I agree with box number 1. I can check that box. I get box number 2 and your final summary. That's a really, really important part of the process. And the other piece that goes along with that is working with leadership up front to explain to them that it's not about an idea, right? And that they're going to see a lot of stuff and a lot of craziness at first. And particularly in the world of science, that can be very overwhelming, right? Depending on what type of scientist you are, and getting the leadership team engaged and excited about that and the messiness, but promising and proving to them over time that you're going to start to converge on something is a really important piece. And that means meetings, it means documentation, and it means, randomly stopping by their office and telling them how awesome something is, or pinging them with an email and telling them about some great data.
Yeah, I think the executive buy-in leaders, you've got to get it across, right? You've got to have other champions. Nate, how are you going about that?
So I think, as Heather said, being inclusive is key. And a lot of teams that I've been a part of over the years, there's sort of a natural hesitation to bring the client in or bring the executive in to give them sort of a peek behind the curtain, and then there's this sort of big reveal after weeks or months of work, and then you get all these questions, and then you usually go to the bar at the end of the day and like, why do they not get it? And I think being inclusive and having them see the process and understand a bit of what that is really everything, and really does remove a lot of the hurdles. And unless you are that executive, how important it is to get their buy-in and get them in the mix. I mean, it's kind of everything unless you are the executive and you can sign off. And I think if you're in a position where you're running a team, my philosophy on that is to, and I think Heather, you were just saying some of this stuff too, of like even a little sort of like ping in the email, like this is amazing and you're going to love it, is to show the potential. It's on you, to show the potential and make it, I think, so enticing. The sizzle sells the steak. That they have to say no. Show them what their company, their division is capable of. Blow their minds. And I think, I talk to a lot of my senior guys on my team, but don't be a permissions-based leader. You have a sense for the path, and I think it's on you to be able to show that potential. But I think being inclusive is absolutely huge. And then one last thing, tying back to what Heather said, is I lost it. I just had it. That the process itself, there it is, right there. That the process itself is going to get like weird and messy and awkward, and when you're bringing them in, expectation setting of like, we're going to go to some places. We do some things internally here where it's so off-brand, it's not even funny, and that helps, right? And so when we bring executives in, they know that. They absolutely know that they're walking in and they're going to see stuff that we would not, sign off on. And I think what I've set up with them is that don't judge us on what you see there. Judge us on what we actually put out into the world. Judge us on what we sign off on as the thing we want to, say, this is us. This is our voice. This is our brand. This is what we want to go forward with.
Yeah, it's interesting, Nate. What do you think are some of the biggest roadblocks you're hearing as you're trying to get that buy-in?
I mean, I think, it's expectation setting. It's creating that safe space. I mean, we've all kind of touched on that point. You can find too much process. I think, you can kind of get a little bit in the weeds on some of the stuff. I think there's a not trusting your talent or knowledge or intuition, and I think conversely trusting it too much. I mean, it's an alchemy of sort of that qualitative and quantitative. And I think, one of the interesting things I've seen here, we have a couple of new teams that have formed. I mean, EF is a kind of an entrepreneurial company. We're always innovating on education. We're always innovating ourselves and how we actually are structured. So we've had a couple of new teams form here. And one of the things that I'm seeing is really interesting is this sort of analysis paralysis thing, where they're kind of over-testing. I mean, it's good to get customer feedback. It's good to know your audience and who are we trying to solve for. I think there's a point, though, where it's like, but you have a ton of knowledge and you are an expert, like don't forget that, I think, in the mix. And to that customer point too, the customer voice is huge. And I've been at companies that they don't actually user test, they don't bring people in, they don't focus group. And then you end up sitting around in a conference room and everybody's got their opinion of what the customer is going to say and how they're going to react. And I think customer voice is that great equalizer of, you get in the room, you're talking around in circles. It's like, let's see what the customer is going to say next year. But I think don't lose that alchemy. Don't lose that balance of your talent, the customer, the executive, and all the teams that are bringing this thing together.
Yeah, great point. Heather, is there anything else you want to add? You talked a fair amount on executive buy-in, or Anne-Marie, on what roadblocks you're finding.
If I may, I want to follow up on what Nate said, and that is part of the FastWorks mantra is get comfortable being uncomfortable. And if you feel uncomfortable, that's good. And that's a very reverse type of thinking for most people. And and a lot of things that are very different, and it is uncomfortable times, but getting comfortable with it first and foremost and teaching that, and the culture is hard to do. The other thing I was going to mention, Nate, too, is I agree. Prior to GE, I worked at Nielsen, the big research company, where I would see firsthand customers have analysis paralysis. And while numbers obviously and metrics are good, one of the things I think that has gained a lot of momentum just in the industry is storytelling. I'll show you that the customer dissatisfaction rate has dropped 20%, but if I give you an actual example of how a cancer patient suffered X, Y, and Z, or I give a very specific client example, customer example, that's when executives, anyone who's participating in solving the problem, it starts to resonate. And I think to take these numbers and really give them meaning, and I find myself doing that a lot too, whether or not I'm talking about my own personal products and selling them, but I always bring back examples of what inspired me from the customer to go down certain paths. So I think, when you're trying to find those ideas that are meaningful and look for those customer meaningful, the context is really important too.
Absolutely. I would agree with Anne-Marie 100%. I mean, and storytelling can be used in some other ways as well. So, one of the things that I push my teams to do is to really tell the story of what the future is. Nate was talking about this as well. The value I provide as a non-scientist to my teams is to make sure that we can put together the best story possible, right? If something dies from a scientific perspective, that's good. I mean, that's fine. That's the way it should be. The real unfortunate thing is when you haven't really compiled the right information and been able to communicate effectively the story of what the future could look like. Because, in that case, then you're not going to get the resources allocated that are going to be the maker for your team. And so the skill in storytelling, I think, is something that is really critical for at least some of your team members to have, so that you're not the only one telling that story.
Yeah.
But painting a very specific, detailed picture is something that I think if people can all of a sudden realize, all right, this is 5 years out, 10 years out, but this is what it could be, this is what it could look like in a very specific sense, that's really motivating.
I completely agree on the storytelling thing. I think as we always innovate, there's new technologies. The thing that is at the base of all of it is great storytelling. It's as old as time, right? And actually, one thing that's going around today, I share it with my team, is a dissection of how Louis C.K. tells a joke. And it is awesome. And every single word, I forget, there's like 207 words in this particular joke. And it's like a 1.5-minute joke. And the dissection of every single word, the emphasis on the words, there's a lot of learning there. I think from a general professional development side, everybody that's listening to this right now should go watch that after, not right now, keep watching this. And really, there's a lot to learn there. And I think, when we talk about like getting executive buy-in, we talk about getting the team comfortable, we talk about storytelling, we talk about drawing people in and giving, meaning numbers. That is storytelling. And if you can become a better storyteller in your career, then that will move a lot of barriers out of the way.
Yeah, very, very, very much so. And I think that, since all three of you have mentioned the storytelling, I think everybody tries to figure out how they could be conversational, tell the story. But I also think, as you hear more and more about customer experience, human-centered design, those buzzwords, I think in the story, when you talk with executives, they're looking to hear, how does this help my consumer, right? How is this really addressing what they're asking for? And I think that, as you're going in talking to that, just even frankly dropping some of the buzzwords of human-centered design, innovation, saying specifics and quotes of what they've told you from research is very important, too. So anyway, let's just make sure everybody listening knows that we have about 15 more minutes. So please, if you could make sure under the topics and questions to submit your questions. We're going to do about 5 more minutes on the panel, and then we will go ahead and take your questions. Okay, and be sure to vote for the ones you want to make sure we get to. Okay, so what I'd like to ask now is, Anne-Marie, we have I've talked about all these ideas that we want to get, right? But, sometimes you can pick the wrong great idea. So has that ever happened? And like, how does this disconnect happen? I mean, so people in the future, as they're listening to what you're saying, can learn a little bit on how do you place better bets to make sure you do get the great ideas. I can't hear her. Can you guys hear her?
No.
Okay. Would anyone else like to jump in?
Sorry, Anne-Marie.
She's muted.
Are you muted, Anne-Marie? Or are you okay?
Yeah, I'm seeing a muted icon on that.
Yeah, you're muted. Go to the top and unmute. You can see the icons at the top. Okay, well let's keep rolling. Do you have any thoughts there, Nate or Heather, in terms of any disconnects that may have happened? If not, I can jump in. So, okay, so I think one thing just to...
Can you hear me back now?
Oh, she's back. Hello. Anne-Marie, you're up.
Testing to see if you're listening. What I was saying when I was muted is that first and foremost, involving customers, you have to involve customers throughout. And there's this hesitancy sometimes for folks to do that. For me, that is a natural thing because if customers involved early and often, those are your charter clients. Those are the people that are partnering with you to make a difference. So I think that's really important. You had asked about have I seen products fail? Yes, because we did not involve the customer. Anytime I've ever seen that happen. What we try to do with the FastWorks methodology, as I mentioned, is to before committing to the entire path and rolling out, $20 million or services XYZ, it's about taking short-term small bets first, whether we use crowdfunding to file out and see what the voice of the customer is first and foremost before we make really big bets. That is a standard and must have, and I'm seeing more and more of it at some of the other companies as well, as I'm sure Nate and Heather have as well.
It's interesting because I think it's not only looking at, how do you not choose, the bad idea, let's say, but also how do you make sure your idea really is as good as and as great as it can be. Yeah. I mean, I know we loved working with Jardin, where we developed a Margaritaville premium frozen drink maker, and they came to us really to develop a blender. But then when we went out and talked, like we said, the iterative process, yeah. Right? We went out and talked to consumers, we heard, the great way to make margaritas, how's the perfect way? Shaved ice. So they want a blender that shaves ice. I mean, who would have thought of that, right? They want one that's a conversation piece at a party, right? They want one. So in the end, we actually developed what we're calling more, frankly, a new category, not just a blender, but a frozen drink maker.
It's an
and so give that's story because
it's an experience, right?
Yeah, it's an experience, and don't go into it thinking you already know what you need, right? Let the consumers, the iterative process, help you evolve it, and you will come out with a much better idea. So guys, we have just a couple more minutes on the panel. What I'd like to do is have each panelist just go around and give a couple key takeaways. What are a couple things that you want to make sure the people listening in, to hear about how do you really vet meaningful ideas? What would you want them to remember from what you've said? So Nate, how about if we start with you?
I think, a couple themes for me today are create a safe space, whatever you want to call it. We'll joke around and call it the trust tree or the nest. I think it's get weird with it, set expectations, and then be inclusive. Don't be afraid to bring people in, but when you are going to bring new people in, just let them know what they're walking into.
Great. Heather?
Yeah, so I think first of all is to have courage, right? To embark on really innovative ideas, you really have to have a lot of courage, and you have to expect that people, very, very bright people, are going to tell you at length why those great ideas are not great. And then I think the other piece that I would say is, and this is probably one of the most important pieces, I'm sure Anne-Marie in her role would agree, there are great ideas everywhere, there is knowledge everywhere. Do not spend your time trying to get up to speed on something when somebody else, around the corner, outside of the company, around the world, has this knowledge, and you can simply get on the phone with them or grab a coffee and glean from them the key points. And I think it's one of the biggest pieces that's what accelerates our teams in terms of being able to take something that seems completely impossible, or that it should have a 20-year life cycle and turn it into a 3 to 5 year life cycle, right? It's leveraging the power of knowledge that's everywhere.
Yeah. And Anne Marie.
Yeah, I think finding, I love that story about Fold It. I think I shared it on the other one too, about how video gamers were able to deconstruct and reconstruct the HIV enzyme. And they know nothing about, they are not medical folks, they don't know. Scientists, after 10 years of trying to create a solution around or a cure for HIV, part of the cure is defining the enzyme and breaking it down. So they would bang their head against the wall, University of Washington, for 10 years. And what they decided to do was construct the problem a different way into a video game and invite video gamers in to figure out how they could fold it, challenges there, of how they invited these video gamers and to help solve the problem. I love that, and I use that story a lot to make sure and reinforce whomever I'm talking to that the best ideas do come from some of the most unexpected places. So.
Great. Well, I want to make sure we get to the question and answers. Absolutely appreciate all the very valuable insights from our panelists. I do want to encourage folks, if you would like any free, wonderful, valuable resources or hear any of our other hangouts that we've already had from the series Innovation by Design, go to www.altitudeinc.com. Under Insights, you'll find many of the free resources. And also, as of Monday, you'll be able to register for the February hangout, which is what does experience design mean to product companies. So with that, let's go ahead and get into the questions. What I do see is there are a couple here that have a lot of votes, so I want to make sure we get to those. And what I'd ask of the panelists, if you all could decide, just let me know who would like to jump in or jump in first. The first question here says, what methods do you use to validate your ideas? So who would like to answer that? Do you have a method to validate ideas?
I can speak to this. It depends on, it depends on the challenge statements and how each challenge requires a different vetting process. In some cases, like at GE, we do have Fuse, which we put out problem statements very broad. They're specifically yet broad about certain kinds of industrials. Those solutions that we deem to have potential value, they are invited into our Chicago facility to be actually additive manufacturing. We actually trial them out in a physical environment. So we have both a front-end collaboration site married with a in a physical location site. So that's one example. But we certainly have others, and it really depends on the challenge of how we actually go through. For each one, it is somewhat custom. I have certain classifications of best practices, but it does depend on what the challenge state.
Yeah, and I think it's important too that you know what your criteria are. You're going out research, talking to consumers, and really understanding what they need, right? And what feedback you're getting to make sure you are not just talking to yourself, right? I think Aisha on one of our last hangouts was talking about how they went down a path because everybody within the company just was sure about a certain idea, and it was a bomb because they never even asked the consumers. So I think that's something that's very, very important. And also a lot of companies have decision-making frameworks, right, that they can use to walk through that process to make sure they really are, like I mentioned before, addressing the why and really understanding why consumers like a certain thing or don't like a certain thing, so they get to the best solution. So, okay. So let's jump to the next question. What's a typical timeline for sourcing or vetting ideas? Heather, would you be willing to take this one?
Sure. So I can answer it. So if you think about it from a product development perspective versus what I do now at Biogen, generally speaking, I would try to run basically a 1-year cycle where you'd be spending an entire year looking for opportunities. And if they were small, you could sort of execute on them right away. Otherwise, on an annual basis, you'd be sort of putting together like a little bit of a deck or a book for a leadership team to review, and you would have done some market research, either a lot of qualitative and some quantitative if it was relevant, and maybe even some concept testing, and that could have been quantitative or qualitative. And so you could almost do it in a 1-year period where you're making sure on an annual basis that you're pulling through. You should be able, if you're a good sized company, and you're a specific product group, to come up with at least 5 really solid big ideas. You should be able to come up with more really big ideas than you can execute on. And if you're not, then I think then probably something's not working. In the case of where I am today at Biogen, it's a little bit different. They can take a lot of time, or they can take a very little time. Like I said, it's process based.
Any other thoughts there on timelines?
Yeah, so for us, I think the obvious answer is it flexes depending on the scale of the project. But I think on average, for instance, I mentioned the big student leadership summit. We also have another, we do these historic event tours, and we have a massive one coming up in Arras in northern France on April 7th. It's the 100th anniversary of the Battle of Vimy Ridge, so a very big deal for the Canadians. And we have about 10,000 travelers we're sending, and we're kind of branding the whole town. So it is a massive scale project for us. And that took about 2 months to get to a place where we felt like we had the idea. We're doing this super amazing sort of decoder experiential learning thing that I'm really proud of what the team has come up with. So that was on the sort of extreme end for us. I think on the shorter end, when we're doing, we're launching a new video series, that can be closer to the 3 to 4 week mark. And there's multiple brainstorms. We really never hit the mark. And I would say the expectation, and this has been the same for me at other companies and other teams, the expectation that you're going to go in the room once and nail it is probably not the best thing. We usually set up about 3 to start and let people kind of sleep on it too. So
great. So we're going to take 2 more questions, and then we'll go ahead and wrap. So next question is, what's the best method to present your ideas to large companies? So we may have lost the other guys, but I'll jump. So I'll jump in. Thank you, Nate.
I'll take this one. Thanks, Gretchen. I think the best method to present, I've over my career presented the ideas to people starting companies, out of their garage to massive companies paying an agency millions of dollars, and I think you want to start to get buy-in. So one of the things we'll do, and some people might say sort of playing politics or being a little deceptive, but I think where you can, being inclusive and getting people familiar with the idea before that big presentation is huge. When you can get more than just the project team kind of, thinking about it, excited about it. I think Heather touched on this a little bit earlier of, sort of those dropping those little emails of like, this is going great. Like just even simple stuff like that will pay off huge when you have that big presentation. And I also think, for those particular moments, it is nice to make it special. I mean, we'll do the boards, and we'll turn around, and I found this at every single place. Like it just, when the client, when the executive, when the key stakeholder feels special, they're excited about it. So I would say get some buy-in early, get some other heads nodding in the room, and then make them feel special when you are in that big presentation.
Excellent. I'm going to ask the one last question, and Nate and Anne-Marie, maybe you can give perspective, and then we'll go ahead and wrap. And again, I'll encourage folks to go to www.altitudeinc.com for additional free resources. We'd love to share the additional hangouts we have. And so the wrap-up question, do you benchmark your ideas against your competition? And if so, what processes do you use? So I don't know, Anne-Marie or Nate, do you guys benchmark against competition?
So we are always looking at competition. I mean, for us, Educational Tours, which is our international high school teacher-led student travel product, we own the market. We do have a fairly large competitor, and we are always keeping tabs, as they very much are on us. Often we'll see some of our ideas sort of appear in an interesting way, maybe 6, 12, 18 months later in some of their stuff. So we are always checking that out. I think for us, it's important to know that we've been around for over 50 years. We're a privately held company, and to not lose sight, I think, of who we are and what our brand is and what our beliefs are. And I think when you get into sort of that like kind of tit for tat thing with competitors, you can kind of lose focus. It can kind of distract. And remember, I think, as an organization, as a team, as a product, who you are and what you believe in, and sort of go back to that feeling and not lose sight. But we do. I think you kind of have to, but don't get distracted by it. I think that would be my big note there.
Great. Anne-Marie, any comment you want to make on that?
Of course we do, and my only comment would be, be careful how you define competition, right?
Yep.
Don't assume. Competition is a trick question nowadays. That's a trick question.
Yes, that is a great point.
Yeah, really good. So with that, we're at the top of the hour. I absolutely want to thank our panelists. I see Heather from Biogen trying to jump back in, so I will thank her later. But Anne-Marie from GE and Nate from EF, you guys have been absolutely very informative.